Okay, it's going. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicolette Pearman. I'm a retention specialist with the Academic Advancement Center STEM unit. Today is the second event in the STEM research series, and it is Introduction to Research Article Searching. And we have two wonderful presentations today. The first presentation will be done by Rachelle and Jocelyn, and they're both science liaisons in the CSU Library. They'll be giving a 30-minute presentation that will be touching on a few different topics that will support you as a STEM student getting comfortable in leveraging the library throughout your undergraduate career. Our second presentation will be done by Dr. Carol Wilusz. She is a professor in the Department of Microbiology, Immunology, and Pathology. She'll be giving a roughly an hour-long presentation that will cover how to effectively use the internet when you're working on research-related content, such as official research projects and course content. And without further ado, I'll pass it along to Jocelyn to get us started.
Okay, hi, my name is Jocelyn Boice, and as Nicolette said, I'm one of the librarians at CSU, and I'm going to start out by talking a little bit about talking with librarians. So let me pull up my PowerPoint and share the screen with you. Okay, hopefully you can see that. Let's see if I can actually do a slideshow here. Okay, and now I'm actually going to turn off my camera just to make sure that I have the bandwidth to do this. So let's see if it'll let me stop my video. Okay. So talking with librarians. Yes, it is okay to talk with librarians. We actually really enjoy talking with students. So what would you talk to a librarian about? Well, it can be pretty much any information need that you have, whether it's related to course assignments or not. So some examples of things that you might want to talk with a librarian about are finding information. So that could be articles, books, data, statistics, facts, or even finding people who are experts in particular topics. You also might want to find out about evaluating information. And that's facts about information sources, and also ways of thinking about the sources that you found, so you can decide whether or not there's something you want to use for your particular purpose. So that brings me to the third one. You might want to talk to us about using information, and that includes organizing information and also how to incorporate sources that you've found into your projects. So various citation styles and also tools for citing information, things like EndNote or Zotero. You might also want to ask questions about the library or CSU in general, and you can also talk to a librarian and suggest purchases for things that the library should own but maybe doesn't. We'll really welcome those suggestions. So when should you talk to a librarian? If you haven't found what you want after 10 to 30 minutes of searching, it's probably time to talk to somebody. And also you can talk to a librarian if you're just not sure who else to ask. If we don't know the answer to your question, we can direct you to someone who does know the answer. So how do you find us? You can find the librarians at the CSU Library website, which is lib.colostate.edu. And when you're on the website, you can look for the Ask icon, which you see in the middle of the screen there. Okay, so that finishes the slideshow. And now I'm going to open up, the library website. And can you actually see the library website, or do you just see a blank screen?
We see your slideshow right now still.
Okay, let me stop it and start sharing again and see if I can get the right thing to show up here. Okay, does that look like the library website now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So to find us on the library website, you can go up to this Ask icon. So this is the same icon that was on the last slide. And this shows up on pretty much every library website page. And once you click on it, you'll have a couple of different options for contacting people at the library. If you need to talk to somebody right away, you can use this chat box. And this is available all the time. So 24 hours a day, every day of the week. If you'd like to speak with a librarian about a particular subject area, you can use this Contact a Librarian link. And this will let you find people like Rachelle and myself who specialize in particular subjects. And so you can see here, if you wanted to speak to somebody about accounting information, you could contact Christine. And there's also an email address and a phone number. So this is the easiest way to find librarians who specialize in particular subject areas. But it's not the only way. I'm going to go back to the library's homepage by clicking on the library's link. And next, I'm going to talk about research guides. So this is just another way to get help for particular subjects. And research guides are essentially just online guides that the librarians have put together for finding and using library materials. And it might be for a particular subject, for a particular course, or for special topics. And to get to these guides, you'll use this research help link underneath the main search box on the library's homepage. And once you click through, you'll have sort of a menu page here. And you have some options. You can find guides by subject area. You can find guides by a particular course. And then we've got a few other options as well for locating guides. But if you'd like to see all of the guides at once, you can use this link here, View All Research Guides. Oops, I actually didn't want it to click on that, but I will go back. Oops, there we go. So I actually wanted to show you this Help by Subject feature. So I'm going to take a look at the guides for biological and physical sciences. And this gives me a list of all of the guides for subject areas within the biological and physical sciences. And I'm just going to show you the Geosciences guide. This is one of the guides that I maintain. And all of these guides are essentially going to have a similar setup. They will all have a menu on the left-hand side, and they'll all have contact information on the right-hand side. So this is just another way that you can get help. And depending on who maintains the guide, it might be organized in a slightly different way. This particular guide, Find Information, shows, and I also like to put a table of contents up at the top of my guide. Not everybody does that, but this refers you to particular resources that are useful for doing research in the geosciences. The Evaluate Information page has some information for evaluating sources that you found. And then the Use Information page has information about citation styles that are used for the geosciences. And every guide might be a little bit different, but they'll all have similar information. So I'm going to go back to the library's homepage one more time. And we've discussed talking to a librarian and using research guides for subject help. So now I'd just like to spend a few minutes introducing one of the major databases for science research, and that's Web of Science. So to get to the CSU Library Databases, I'll go to this A to Z database list link underneath the main search box. It'll take me through to a landing page where I've got some starting points listed. These are databases that cover scientific literature and also literature in the humanities, the social sciences, in a lot of different subject areas. So these tend to cover a broad range of subjects. So that's why they're listed under starting points. But there are some other options for finding subject-specific databases. One of them is this drop-down box in the middle of the screen. As you can see, there are a lot of different subject areas listed here. If you choose any one of these, you'll have a list of databases that are recommended for doing research in that particular subject area. There's also an alphabetical listing. So if you know the name of a particular database that you want to use, you can pick it out of that list. I'm going to scroll down just a little bit so that you can see what the database listings look like. Each database listing has a short description of the database. And sometimes it has the dates of the materials that are in the database. And then it almost always has some information about what subject it covers and the types of materials that you might find within that database. So you can use these descriptions to decide which database might be useful for you if you're looking for information on a particular topic. I'm going to scroll back up though, and I'm going to click on this Web of Science link. This is a great database for starting your research in pretty much any science discipline because it does cover lots of different topical areas. And it also primarily has scholarly articles in the database. This is the search interface for Web of Science. I've got my search box. I have some options for telling the database where I would like it to look for my search terms. In Web of Science, topic is a nice general place to search. It actually searches a number of the main fields like title, author, abstract, that kind of thing. So for the general searches, you'll just want to leave that as at topic. You can add search boxes if you'd like to using this add row. So if you've had experience in an introductory library instruction session where they covered Boolean searching or searching with and or to connect your search terms, you could add a row so that you could do that type of Boolean searching within this database. But for today, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do a very simple search so that you can see what this interface looks like. So I'm going to search for coral bleaching as my search term. So I'm going to search in topic. And this is my results screen. It tells me how many results I have, about 3,300. And then it gives me some options along the left-hand side for narrowing down my results. So I could pick particular publication years if I only want to look at materials from a certain date range. I also have Web of Science categories. These are essentially subject areas. And so if, for instance, you were searching on some terms that were maybe used in many different disciplines, I actually sometimes find that if I'm searching for the word ecology, it shows up not only in ecology journals, but also in medical journals. And so I could potentially just pick the ecology category to just look at materials that come from journals that have been categorized as publishing material about ecology. So that's one way you could also narrow down your results. And then lastly, I wanted to point out this document types option. A lot of databases will have an option for narrowing down your results to only peer-reviewed articles. Web of Science doesn't have an option like that. I'm not entirely sure why, but probably because most of the journals and most of the materials in Web of Science are peer-reviewed. They do, however, sometimes index book chapters or conference proceedings, which might not have gone through peer review. So if you want to replicate that peer-reviewed limit that you see in some other databases, you can actually use article and review. Those two document types correspond with article types that you are usually peer-reviewed. So you would just click those two, you'd click refine, and you can see it narrowed down my results. It kicked out about 300 things. The other thing you'll want to look at is the way that the material are being shown to you. So they're being sorted and shown to you in a particular order. In Web of Science, it generally shows you the newest things first, but you can change that if you want to. So a lot of times it's useful to use sort by relevance to see the things that the database thinks are most relevant to you first. There are a few other options as well under this more dropdown. So let's change it to relevance. And it does change around the order that these are being shown. And it looks like these are pretty much on topic. You can find out more information about the article if you do click on the title. You get some additional information here. One thing that you will notice, though, that is missing is the entire article. So there is no actual article within this database. So some databases will have the entire article right in the database, and some of them, like Web of Science, won't. So if you want to find the entire article, you'll use this Find It at CSU button. That button checks all of the library's subscriptions to see if the library has that article. And if the library does have the article, you'll see something that says full text available at, and then there will be a link with the name of the journal or a publisher. If you click on that first link, it'll take you through to the journal where this article was published. And from here, you can download the entire article. All right. Well, that is everything that I wanted to cover in my section. So I will stop sharing my screen and I will turn it over to Rachelle.
Yes, thank you. So I'm Rachelle Raymer, and like Jocelyn, I am one of the Science Liaison Librarians here at CSU. So today I'm going to particularly cover access issues. So Jocelyn showed us how to get to an article if we've already gone what I think is the smart route, which is through the library's website. Makes it nice and easy. But even if you don't go through that route, the library will still get you anything that you need in terms of information, right? This is one of the things that we work really hard at. One of the privileges that you have as being a student at CSU is that you should not have to pay for information while you're here. That is why the library exists and why we work really hard at collecting and getting things for you. So I'm going to show you various ways to use the library to your advantage so that you don't have to pay for information and you can just get it through us. All right, so I'm going to share my screen now. And show you some of that stuff. Okay, so the first thing, I should say, is everybody seeing Google Scholar now? Okay, so this is where I'm starting because we know that this is a very common place for people to search. I personally find Web of Science a lot easier to use, but you know, whatever anybody chooses to use is, I mean, research should be done in the way that is most comfortable and convenient for the person. Everybody has their own style, right? So like there's no judgment. I'm just saying that my style says Web of Science is easier. But if you are using Google Scholar, you can actually link this up to the CSU library by going up here under settings. And if you go under settings, there'll be a library links button here where you can search. So if you start searching for Colorado State, it should pop up. It might not for me because I've already got it linked under here, but okay, so you'll see all the different options. What you're looking for is this one that says Find It at CSU. Just like that button that was in Web of Science, we call it the same thing no matter where we're putting it. So you're going to want to select that Colorado State Find It at CSU button and click that and save it. Okay, and now it becomes magic. So when I do a search, so if I had, for example, a research paper that I was doing on microplastics and I was searching for information. Now you see that we've got the Find It at CSU button right here in Google Scholar, and it does exactly the same thing. It takes me back to the library to search all of our subscriptions to see whether or not we have access to this article. And once again, right, it's got that full text available at, and I just click into it And so here's something that you may have run into in the past. I am currently off campus, and because I am off campus, but I routed myself through the library, I am being asked to log in. This is just my EID and password, but I have to be able to type it, right? Okay. And that's all there is to it. Just EID and password, and I'm in. Even though I am nowhere near campus, I still have access anywhere in the world through my EID and password to this article, and I can download it. So even though I didn't go through the library's website, I still have access to the library's resources, right? So that makes it really nice and easy and convenient. So that's one way to make Google Scholar work really seamlessly with the library. You know, not always going to be looking just through Google Scholar, even in addition to the library resources. So there's even more tools that you can use for that. So if you go to the library's website and you look at off-campus access, we have this tool called LibKey Nomad, which is a very convenient way to keep all of that access, just like I've just plugged into Google Scholar, no matter what website I'm on. So when you click on this, this will take you into the Chrome store because I am using currently Chrome. It's also available for Microsoft Echo and for Firefox, but unfortunately, it is not available for like Safari or certain other browsers. So it's dependent on which browser you're using, but if it is available for your browser, it's just an extension that you add to your browser, and you can see I've already got it plugged in up here. So I've got the little drop, and the way that this works. So say that I was continuing my research, and I'm looking at this Wikipedia article on microplastics because I wanted to get some background. Now, I'm not going to cite this Wikipedia article, but what I am going to use is one of the best things about Wikipedia is their reference section, right? They usually have a really lovely, extensive, like over 100 articles in their reference section right here. And you'll see how it's popping up with this provided by Colorado State University. That's because I have this LibKey Nomad set up. So it's adding this into this article. It's recognizing just from the text on the screen what article it is that they're talking about. And so if I were to say, click into this, it would just take me right to the article. And see, it's looking at CSU. Now I signed in just a couple of minutes ago, right? And because I'm still in the same browser, I'm still signed in. Until I close that browser or delete my cookies, I am still signed in, so I don't have to do so again. But if I wasn't signed in, there would have been that same pop-up screen, just EID and password. That's how they recognize that you deserve access to it, right? So it's very easy and convenient. Even if it doesn't necessarily add in the plugin, so like for this article, many of these aren't showing up because they're books, and LibKey Nomad only is going to work for articles. It doesn't work for books or book chapters or websites, anything like that. But so for example, this article, it's not recognizing, and that's probably just because the text doesn't match what's in the database. But if I click into this article, and you'll see it's trying to get me to buy. I don't want to do that, right? Like, don't do that. You're a CSU student, don't do that. Instead, I'm going to go to this download PDF button that LibKey Nomad has added to my screen, right? So I'm still getting that same access no matter where I am on the web. Okay, so LibKey Nomad is a really powerful tool, and it can make your research go a lot easier and a lot faster because it's going to get you in very quickly. However, like I said, it doesn't plug in with all browsers, or there might be other reasons why it's not working that day. So, right, like I'm going down the line, right? You've got, start with the library, that's the easiest. The Google Scholar is the next easiest. LibKey Nomad's great. But if all else fails, we still got you. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy the title of this article because I want it, but I don't want to pay all this money for it. Right? So I'm going to go to the library's website and I'm just going to plug that journal article title right into the search. And look, it's going to pop up right there at the top in a minute here. After it thinks. Oh, it's thinking hard. I think I put it through its paces a little bit too much today. Okay. So first thing to do, confirm that this is actually the article that I wanted, right? Because just because it has the same title, it might not be. But look, it's Jeremy Conkle in Environmental Management. Was that the article I was looking for? So I can go back to where I was. Yep, Jeremy Conkle, Environmental Management, right? So I'm doing what I need to do and confirming to myself that this is actually what I wanted. I can click in, I can read the abstract to confirm that it's what I wanted. But now I'm back into the library's ecosystem, right? So I can get access in the same way using the links that are provided here, right? So when all else fails, just search for the article title and see if it shows up like that. Okay, so it's very easy, it's very convenient. If you do run into any problems, right, we've got that 24/7 chat, so you can always ask us. Now, what happens though if we don't actually have this? Because although we have an amazing library here at CSU, we do not, of course, subscribe to everything that exists. That would be impossible. So there are going to be times when you run into something that we don't have access to. We will still get it for you. That's the awesome thing, right? Like, even if we don't already subscribe to it, we will get that for you. So the way that that works is if you look under services on our website, and if you go to what we call Interlibrary Loan, you'll see a description here that talks about how this works. It's spinning. It'll get there. But basically what this is, it's a service where if we don't have it, we'll ask another library that does have it to send it to you. When we're talking about articles and book chapters, this is amazingly convenient because they will actually send you a PDF and it'll come straight to you. So, you know, it's very quick turnover. If you want a physical object, a book, they will mail it. And they'll either mail it to the library where you can pick it up, or you can actually have them mail it to you at home. So, you know, mailing takes a little bit longer because it has to, you know, physically go through the the post office system, right? But this is a free service for you to use, so you should not hesitate to do so. And it's also very easy to do. So you can see right up here, there's this login to Iliad. And in fact, this is also, if you go under my accounts, when it talks about Interlibrary Loan, it's the same thing, either place. And it'll take you into this thing called Iliad. And you'll see it took me right in. That's because I had already signed in. I'm still in the same browser, haven't closed it. But again, just your EID and password, very simple. And you can make requests over here on the side. The type of request, just fill it out for whichever type of material that you're looking for. And it's just going to ask you basic information that you can get. So like if we didn't have this one, I'd be able to just copy and paste information from here and request this, and they would send it to me. When it's available, whether digitally or physically, you'll get an email telling you either log back into Iliad and get your article, or come to the circ desk and pick up your book. If it is an article, you would just go here to download your documents, and you'll see this is an article I requested a couple weeks ago, and I could just open up that PDF and it's mine to use. So it's very quick and easy. So those are the main things that I wanted to cover in terms of access. The thing to just remember is that don't pay for information, make the library pay for it for you, because that's what we're doing anyway. And if you have any questions, Jocelyn showed you those really awesome ways to get a hold of us. And we are always eager and waiting to hear from you with your questions. We enjoy hearing about your research and working with you on those topics. So please never hesitate to reach out to us.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn and Rachelle, for going through both of those presentations. I learned a lot, and I am just amazed of like what I didn't know. And I went through CSU like 2 years ago, so I'm happy that y'all shared this information. We did have a student join, Shauna. She's amazing. So I want to open it up to Shauna. If you have any questions, I want to make sure that they get answered before we move on to Dr. Willis's presentation.
Wow, thank you for saying I'm amazing. I needed a little light in my day. Thank you. Rachelle had just mentioned that there's ways to get in contact with the librarian specifically, and I may have missed that part. So if we could just briefly go over that, other than maybe your email, unless you linked your emails.
Yeah, the first part of the recording went over how to contact a librarian, and Jocelyn did that piece. So this is being recorded, so you'll have access to that.
Oh, perfect. Okay, then no, I don't think I have any questions. And thank you so much for all the information, ladies.
Awesome.
You're welcome. And certainly Rachelle and I can put our emails in the chat for you as well.
Awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you again, Rachelle and Jocelyn. So now without further ado, I'll invite Dr. Wilusz to get us started with your presentation. Feel free to begin whenever you're ready.
Okay. Let me just share my screen. While I'm doing that, so my name's Carol Wilusz. I am a professor in the microbiology, immunology, and pathology department. I'm also the director of the Cell and Molecular Biology graduate program. And I'm also the director of the Molecular Quantification Core, which means that I get to spend a lot of time testing poop for COVID-19. And so I have a lot of hats at CSU. And this little seminar that I'm going to give today is one that I do for first year Plan B Master's students here at CSU. So it's really just getting them ready to really dive into graduate level research, but it's also, I think, very pertinent for undergraduates as well. So my subtitle here is "Don't Believe Everything You Read in Cyberspace," and I'm gonna can you see my slides? Okay, yeah. So I'm gonna just figure out how to get my. So basically, what the objective here is to train you to identify reliable and relevant scientific information using internet searches. And I think it's something that when I was growing up, we never had the internet. And I certainly realize it has a huge amount of power, but it's also a very dangerous place. So I'm going to try and help you identify what's good information compared to what's bad information. I'm going to skim over the search engines because I think that Rachelle and Jocelyn covered that pretty well, but I'll go over what I have. And then I'm going to teach you about the crap test, which is kind of funny considering I spent half of my life testing crap, but it's a different kind of crap that I'm going to tell you about, which involves learning how to identify reliable information on the internet. And then I'll give you an example, which is the example that I used to use in my class, which started in 2013. And lo and behold, despite the fact that I started using this in 2013, it's about SARS coronavirus. And so you'll get to see a little bit of history there as well. Okay, so where do you most commonly start when you want information on the internet? Pretty much you open up your web browser, and the web browser is usually probably set so that it goes straight to Google. So that's where most people start when they want to find something on the internet. And it has, it's definitely useful. If it wasn't useful, it wouldn't be making so much money and so many people wouldn't use it. But it does have some limitations. So the problems with Google are that it's there to make money, right? It's not there to give you information. It's there to give you information and make money. And so it makes money from making you click on links. And so it will do things that are not necessarily unbiased, and it has certain ways of ranking information that make it not all that relevant. So you might not find what you're looking for. When you're doing scholarly research, you probably don't want to just go to Google because it's not necessarily going to give you what you want. And so there are other ways to do it. So Jocelyn went through Web of Science, which is a very good way to look for information. One of the things that I think is also very common is that you go to Google and then you click on the first thing that comes up. And most of the time, the first thing that comes up is so if there were more people here, I'd do this as I'd let you answer. But Shauna, if you do want to have a guess at what the first site that comes up most often in a Google search is.
An ad.
An advert, yeah. So the adverts come to the top, and then like there's usually a real site that comes to the top on its own.
It's usually Wikipedia for me.
Yeah, it's usually Wikipedia. So Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia, is very, very popular. It's a mine of information. And so there are reasons why you also shouldn't use Wikipedia as your primary source. And I didn't know all this until I didn't really trust it, because I knew it was it's written by anonymous people and there's no peer review and anybody can write it. So that was one reason that I didn't really feel all that comfortable using it, because basically anybody can change it. So even if the person that writes the article is actually very well qualified, somebody else can go in and change it and make it into complete rubbish. And so that makes it a little bit risky to use. But when I learned that over only 20% of over 1.5 million biographies in that site are of women, that tells you something. The information that you're getting is what men put onto there. And when you look at the people that are writing Wikipedia, 90% of them are male. Most of them are located in Europe and North America, so it's biased towards the Western Hemisphere. And then 1% of the people that write for Wikipedia write 77% of the articles. So it's a very like skewed view of the world, and not all of it is accurate. And so that doesn't mean that it's not useful, because actually it does contain useful information. But if you're using it to provide accurate information for a report, for example, then you really don't want to be citing it as your primary source. You want to go to the sources that are cited inside Wikipedia and use them. And then just do bear in mind who's writing these articles. These are people who have time. They're not paid. Most of them aren't. It's free. They have free time that they are spending putting this information in. And they're gathering it from various places, and some of them take it very seriously, but still they have maybe odd motives and more time than the rest of us to do this. So just be careful using Wikipedia. Don't blindly trust the person that wrote it, because you don't know who they are. Go to the primary source. So the scholarly searches, Web of Science is a good one, and then Google Scholar and PubMed are two that I use a lot. So I'm a biological scientist, a life scientist, so I use PubMed a lot. But Google Scholar is also a good one, and PubMed works pretty similarly to Web of Science. It's just more narrow on biomedical research. And so I just wanted to highlight the differences between these two, because you might want to use both of them. So it's not just preference. I think sometimes it depends what I want to find. If I want to find something that I know is buried in the middle of an article somewhere, so I'm interested in a method that's in a paper, then I would use Google Scholar, because PubMed only searches the abstract, and if it's in the methods, I'm not going to find it in PubMed. But Google Scholar searches the whole article. But then there are even Google Scholar has a little bit of bias in it, or maybe not enough bias in it, because there's no restrictions on what can go into Google Scholar. So the publishers identify themselves as being scholarly articles, as being scholarly journals. And so there are a lot of journals out there that may not really be all that scholarly, and they will come up in a Google Scholar search, whereas PubMed and Web of Science, you actually have to be reviewed and approved to get into those searches. And so it's a different kind of thing. So PubMed is more of a database. It's curated by humans. Google is like curated by a whole bunch of robots searching things. It's a search engine, not a database. So the articles, when they go in there, they don't have to be in a special format. Google will find them, but there's no structure to it. And because of that, somebody else doing the same search 3 days from now is going to get different things from it. Whereas with PubMed, most of the time the search is going to come back the same. If you put the same search in, you're going to get the same information. Both of these can sort the results based on the date or the relevance, but Google Scholar will give you more citations, and those citations can be used to manipulate the rankings as well. So you get, like, if somebody is citing their own work a lot, then it will come up higher on Google Scholar than it would in PubMed. And so you can artificially make yourself more important than you really are using Google, whereas PubMed has like restrictions to stop you doing that. So because I'm a biomedical scientist, I'm more likely to go to PubMed, except when I want to find something in the body of an article, because Google Scholar is better in that case. And sometimes if I just can't find what I'm looking for, I'll just look in both. And then there are ways to use these to your advantage better. So you're more likely to find what you are looking for if you put in more terms. So like if you put in SARS and 2021 and vaccine, you're more likely to find papers that are directly relevant to what you want. You can also restrict your search term to a specific field. So you can put SARS in the title, then that's good. Then you know that the whole article is going to be about SARS, and it's not just going to be buried in the middle somewhere. And then you can also restrict your search to review articles, and Jocelyn showed you how to do that on Web of Science, and it's very similar with PubMed. and Google Scholar as well. You just click on a button that says review. And if you're doing like just trying to get background information to bring yourself up to speed, then generally review articles are the best place to start. But if you're really delving deep into a specific topic, then you want to really start going to the primary research, not just to the review articles. So like really, I use review articles to make sure that I understand the broad field if it's a new field to me. But once I'm really writing some kind of a report or a paper, then I'll be citing the original articles, not the review articles. I think that's an important thing to do, just because the review articles are written by somebody who has an opinion, and they choose what articles they're going to cite, and their opinion may not be the only opinion. And so you want to make sure you've looked at multiple opinions or at the primary literature and come up with your own opinions. So the internet is a scary, scary place. There is so much information in there. When I was your age, I had to go to the library and go and pull a book or a journal off the shelf and then make a copy of it on the copy machine. And the number of articles that I was assigned to read was limited. They gave me very careful information about how to find it. You guys are expected to be able to just, you can't find anything on the internet, and nobody really tells you how to narrow it down half the time. And it's kind of intimidating. So how do you find appropriate sources as opposed to just being overwhelmed by what's out there? So this is a test that a group at California State University in Chico put together. So the CRAP test is a way that you can go through information about the article that you're looking at and see whether it's something that's going to be useful for what you want. So the C is for currency. When was the source published? R is for relevance. Is the source appropriate for your needs? A is for authority. Who wrote it? What are their credentials? Accuracy is another A. So has it been reviewed or refereed? And then P is purpose. Why is this information there? And if you look at each of these 5 attributes of an article, it will help you narrow down whether this one is one that you should be using or whether you should just throw this one out the window and go find something better. And so I'm going to go through each of these one at a time. So currency, the publication date, why is that important? So a publication that came out like yesterday is most likely to reflect the current thinking in the field. The authors will have been, like, within the last 6 months, they will have written their background and they will have been reviewing all of the information leading up to their study. So the current thinking in the field should be presented in the background of the article. I mean, they're most likely to use state-of-the-art approaches. If you want to know the newest, best way to do something, then you want to go to the newest, best article. But the danger of using the most recent publications is that they are most likely to not have been reproduced or built upon or really investigated very carefully by other people. So you're really relying on the people that wrote that article to have done a good job, because you're probably not enough of an expert to be able to tell whether they've done a good job on your own. And so generally you do want to go to the most recent, but you want to bear that in mind that sometimes the most recent it's not necessarily the most trustworthy. And then the scientific textbooks, when I was an undergrad, we relied on them hugely for information. They probably took about the same amount of time to get published, but it also took a long time to get the primary literature published as well, because everything was done by mail. But nowadays, the length of time it takes to assemble and put together a textbook, a lot of the information in there is out of date. So they don't keep up. And so, although they're generally good for getting background, they're probably not the best things to be citing just for detailed information, because they probably are out of date. And so the fact that you need the most recent literature hasn't been like necessarily put through its paces. You guys are probably aware of all of the papers that have been published on COVID. Like that you read about a new paper that's been published in COVID in the New York Times every single day, or whatever newspaper you happen to read. Since like the start of COVID, there have been over 105 retracted papers, some of them in very good journals like the Lancet and the Journal of Neurology, that have been retracted for various reasons. And that they can be things like the study was conducted unethically. There was one paper on anal swabs where they hadn't gotten the patient's permission to publish the data from the research, and they had to retract the paper. There can be issues with authorship. The authors may not have all seen the paper. There could be data management problems. They thought they had the data, but then when the journal asks to see it, they can't prove it. They can't bring the original data up. There can be plagiarism. There can just be mistakes, right? Everybody sometimes makes mistakes. They could have collected the data wrong. They could have analyzed it wrong, or they could have drawn conclusions that weren't actually the right ones from it. Or they could have an undisclosed conflict of interest. And so all of these things can lead to retraction. And it's been really common, I think, for COVID, because people are they feel like, I did this experiment, it's really important, this might be helping people, I need to publish it quickly, I'm going to put it up on a place where it's not even going to be peer reviewed because I want to get it out there quickly so people can see it and use it. And so that's been very valuable. I've used it myself. I've been able to get information that's helped me to be able to test for COVID in sewage that I wouldn't have been able to get in normal times, because people don't publish their data that quickly. And so it has been really useful, but it also has resulted in stuff that's not been very good being published. So this is an example from like before COVID I just found it was kind of, it's a bit scary how this happens. So this is a British newspaper, and it's talking about these organisms called water bears that can actually live in space. They can go out into space and in like some kind of desiccated form, and then you can bring them back into the spaceship and they're still alive. And so they were interested in what's in the genome of these organisms. They can live in conditions that nobody else can live in, right? And so they did genome sequencing, and they came to the conclusion that a fifth of the genome of these bacteria came from a fifth of the genome of these organisms, which are like little bugs, came from bacteria and or from plants. So they basically, these organisms had somehow merged their genomes with plants and bacteria. And that, if that was true, that was actually really kind of cool. But it turns out that within a month of them publishing this, another group that had also sequenced the same organism but not gotten around to publishing it yet, published their own article saying that it was rubbish. And what had happened was, you can see this is green on the inside. They hadn't done a good job of separating out the DNA from the bacteria and the plant, the algae that the tardigrade was eating. And so they mixed all of the sequence up for lots of different organisms and then stuck it all together. And so these guys, it was a genuine mistake. It wasn't anything that was unforgivable. They hadn't done it on purpose. But it is important to know that, like, sometimes people are going to be proved wrong. And so you should always take everything with a pinch of salt. This was maybe a little bit surprising. But that was also why it got published in a good journal. PNAS is a very good journal. And so it got, the good journals want the stuff that's newsworthy because they want it going out into the newspaper, because that makes them money. They get more people clicking on them. Okay, so relevance. Is the source appropriate for your needs? So the relevance of the article, basically you want to ask yourself, does the information relate to your topic or answer your question? Who is the intended audience of the article? Is it an expert? Is it going to be totally over your head and you're not going to be able to understand it because you're trying to learn about the field from the ground? Or is it aimed at a beginner and you want something more advanced? So generally you want to use review articles and book chapters for basic background, as I said, and for life scientists, these are good journals. There are journals probably in your field if you're not a life scientist. Is the information at an appropriate level for you? Can you understand it? It's really dangerous to start citing sources that you can't understand, especially if anybody's going to have a chance to be asking you questions about it. So be careful about that. Like it's very easy to just say, oh, well, the title of this looks like it's relevant to what I'm talking about, so I'm just going to cite it anyway. But like sometimes you're not actually citing what you think you are. And then try and look at more than one source. Don't just take the top ranked article because it might not be the best one. And so like if you're trying to write a paper on SARS coronavirus 2 and vaccines, then the most relevant papers are going to be at the intersection of that. They're going to have information about the vaccines and the SARS coronavirus, whereas there will be a lot of articles out there that are just on general vaccines and a bazillion articles on SARS coronavirus 2. So you want to narrow down your search as much as you can. Authority. Now this is one of the most important ones. Who wrote it and what are their credentials? And this is why I don't think Wikipedia is a good source, because the people writing it don't have authority, or if they do, you can't tell because you don't know who they are. So what you want to know is the author an expert in their field? So where are they working? What are their qualifications? Have they published previously? Are other people citing their work? And sometimes that's not easy for you to know, which is why it's best to go to peer-reviewed journals, which is, I'll get into peer review in a minute, because they generally are not going to accept articles from people that are not qualified, or the peer reviewers will catch them on that. But it is important that you do want to know that the person, if you're citing an article on, I don't know, on SARS coronavirus 2, you want to make sure that it's been written by a virologist, for example, not somebody that's jumped on the bandwagon, has never worked on that virus at all before, but was able to get money from NIH because NIH was throwing it out in a big panic a year ago. So you just need to make sure that you know who the person is, if you can do that. And then the accuracy, if you can't tell whether the person has the authority, then you need to be able to rely on the journal that you're looking at. And so the peer review process basically takes an expert's opinion and puts it up and sends it out to a whole bunch of other people who are also experts in the field. And they evaluate whether this paper or this study is any good. And they have an opportunity to give feedback that the authors then have to go back and respond to. So the peer review process starts with people studying things. And then once they've studied it, they think they've done everything they need to make some conclusions. They write it up, and then they send it to a journal editor. And the journal editor will read it. They probably don't read all of it. They probably read the abstract. If it looks like it's interesting, a good fit for their journal, then they'll send it out for peer review. And those peer reviewers will read the article, and then they provide suggestions. They say, oh, this experiment needs to be done again. The data doesn't look very good. The statistical analysis isn't good enough. Their conclusion is not really right. They could have, their data could be interpreted in different ways. So they make suggestions about how you can improve your articles. And so those suggestions go back to the journal editor, and then he or she sends them on to the scientists, who then will look at them, and sometimes they get those responses from the reviewers. The editor's in the middle there, so the scientists don't know who the reviewers are, but the reviewers do know who the scientist is usually, although you can do double-blinded. So once they get their reviews back, they probably get upset, get a bit mad that somebody's criticizing their work, but most of the time they will buckle down and do some more experiments, or they'll come back with a rebuttal that says, well, actually this reviewer is wrong because blah, blah, blah. And so then they'll change their article. They might do some more experiments. They might not. They might just change the way that they've written the article, and they send it back to the editor, and the editor quite often sends it back to the reviewers, and then the reviewers decide, yeah, this is good enough now, it can be published, or they'll say, no, it's still not good enough. It's not going to be published, and they'll reject it. And then you can send it to a different journal that's not such high-powered journal, or you can go try again to make it better and submit it to another journal. So, and then eventually it'll get into the journal at the end there. And so this is a pretty long-winded process. It used to be done entirely by mail. So you'd have to mail your paper to the editor, and the editor would mail copies of it out to the reviewers, and then they would mail it back. So you can imagine it would take like 3 or 4 months to get the process done. Sometimes it still takes 3 or 4 months now, even though it's all done by email, but it should be a little bit quicker now because it's all done electronically, and you don't have to make like 6 copies of your paper to send to the reviewers. But during COVID times, and it started a little bit before, people do all this work and they just want to get it out there. And I think in the fields of physics and maybe computer science, there were these preprint servers or online servers where you can post your manuscript before it's been accepted for publication. So you basically, instead of this process that takes a long time, you write your manuscript and then you put it on the preprint server and the whole world can see it. And at the same time, while you're showing it off to the whole world, you send it to the journal and then go through all the months to years of the peer review process. And eventually it gets published properly through the other avenue. But this way you get your information out there quickly. And so these preprint servers, a lot of what you've been reading about COVID has been published in medRxiv and bioRxiv. Basically, you put your information, your data into a publishable format and you upload it, and there it is. The whole world can see it, and you get comments on it. You can get reviews like online from it, but it's not been officially peer reviewed. And the newspapers are now able to get access all of these articles that are not peer reviewed, and then they write about them. And sometimes it turns out not to be true. So you do have to be careful, especially with these preprint servers, how you're interpreting the data. Okay, and then the last one of these is the purpose. Why is this information in existence in the first place? Why is this article that you found, why is it there? So that people have a lot of different reasons for writing articles. Sometimes they want to teach, so a textbook is generally written to just teach people. Sometimes they're trying to sell you something. So this like sheet here is trying to sell you solar panels, but you could probably learn something about solar panels by reading it. Sometimes it's informing you or trying to change your mind. Opinion articles are trying to change your mind or give you or get you to have the same opinion as they do. And then sometimes it's just entertainment. This one was, it's a real scientific article, but whoever's picked it up is trying to make it into more entertaining articles, and more people click on it and they make more money with advertising. And so it's important to know why people are writing things, because their reasons can introduce bias into the way that it's written. And so that they might be, the way that you interpret it and use that information should be informed by understanding why the article is there in the first place. So a textbook, they're really, I mean, I guess they do make money from writing textbooks, but generally it's not very much. So really it's there to inform you, and there's not really too much to worry about that somebody's put a spin one way or another on it. But an article like this, which is a letter to the Washington Post, the person writing this clearly has an opinion, and that they're quite kind of worked up about it, and they want to write an email to get everybody else to agree with them. And so that's their opinion is just that, it's their opinion, and you, without knowing what other people's opinions are, then you can't really interpret it very well. And then this is an article on how to use a kit for something or other. Clearly they're gonna be wanting to sell you that kit, so they're gonna make it look better than it might actually be because they want you to buy it. So like, you just need to have that in the back of your mind. So there's lots of different kinds of articles that you can come across, and some of them are really useful for your like class reports and for research. I use probably all of these kinds of articles in various ways. I read the newspaper every day, and sometimes I'll go and follow up and it will be something relevant to my research. So I'll try to find the original article. Opinion articles and correspondence are always to like scientific journals. Those are always interesting to read because it's like watching people have a public argument. Research articles and review articles are obviously that's the kind of reading that I do most of. Corporate websites, if I'm looking to buy a kit for an experiment, or like learn more about a certain instrument, I will go to corporate websites. Government websites, I think everybody probably has now used the CDC website a lot more than they ever would have done in the past. That's what that's a government-run website. It has very useful information about diseases. There's other ones like NIH, the EPA. Hopefully those are reliable, although sometimes less so. It depends, I guess, on who's in power, but generally they should have reliable information, or at least what the government wants us to know. And then academic and non-profit websites, they're quite often like my personal website at CSU, a non-profit websites, so like charity websites, they have useful information about certain diseases or what a lab is working on. And then forums, wikis, blogs, and discussion boards. Sometimes I am troubleshooting an experiment, and these are great places to find other people who've had the same problems. But each of these comes with their own certain issues, right? So newspaper articles and magazines are written by journalists, and those people are generally not experts in what they're writing about. Their job is to take information that they get from other people who might be experts and then put it into a format that makes it accessible to other people and to the general public, essentially, and that sells their newspaper or magazine. And so they're going to sensationalize things. They don't care too much if it's a little bit inaccurate. And there may be misunderstandings because the scientist that's talking to them may not actually explain things all that well at the right level. The important thing to note is that these are not peer reviewed. Nobody ever has time when they're writing a newspaper article to have 3 other people read it to make sure the scientific content is correct. Most of the time it's going to go out as is. And so they may be based on published peer reviewed articles, but quite often they don't really mention the source. They'll mention the author maybe, and you have to do some Googling to find out who or what the original source was. So from the point of view of the CRAP test, obviously these articles are very current. They come out the next day most of the time, or even the same day sometimes if you're talking about YouTube and other the television news. They're often relevant to what the public is interested in, but the person writing it does not have the authority, and you need to keep that in the back of your mind that they're not to be 100% trusted, and because of that, their accuracy and their purpose are somewhat questionable. So it's not that you can't use these to get information, but they may not be the best sources to be citing when you're writing a report, because you probably want to go to the actual published peer-reviewed article that they're basing their report on and read it yourself, which is more work, I know, but that's how we do it. Opinion articles and correspondence editorials, these can be in peer-reviewed journals. And sometimes if they are in a peer-reviewed journal, they'll be contributed by experts, but if they're in the newspaper, they may or may not be contributed by an expert. Sometimes they're peer-reviewed if it's in a scientific journal. Sometimes they do a peer review their opinion articles, but a lot of the time they're not going to, because it's presented as an opinion. And because it's being presented as an opinion, it may be biased, or it may be contrary to what the whole of the rest of the field is thinking. So a scientist may have come up with some brilliant idea that's not something that anybody else has ever thought of, and might be presenting that in an opinion article. So you need to recognize that, hey, this is a new idea and there may not be that much support for it yet because nobody's had a chance to test it. So from the point of view of the CRAP test, the opinion articles, generally they're current, they're relevant, or they can be relevant. But again, the authority, accuracy, and purpose may be a little bit questionable, and you might want to keep that in the back of your mind and look at other possible explanations, other possible opinions, just to make sure you're providing a balanced view of whatever it is you're talking about. So research articles and review articles are contributed by experts. They're reviewed by experts, and so generally I would call them the most reliable sources of scientific information, but you should still read them critically because people make mistakes. So my animation's not working great, but so people do make mistakes in these journals, even the very good ones. And so if you know something about the field, then you should definitely be reading it and looking when they're not just reading what's in the text, but actually looking at the figures and seeing, can you see in the data what they say they can see in the data, And if you can't see it, if it's a picture of something and you can't see what they're talking about, then maybe they're over-interpreting, it's wishful thinking, or maybe they haven't quantified it right. And so you need to, this is something you'll learn as you do more, get more experience, is how to really compare what somebody says and what you see, and understanding how to interpret certain types of experiments and data. But generally, these are going to be the most reliable sources of information. I don't think any instructor is going to ding you for citing a paper that turned out to have a mistake in it. Most of the time, we would expect you to trust what you read in these journals and not be able to pick out the big mistakes in them at the level that you're at. But is it also important, though, that, so I know, because I've been in this field a long time, that these are good, reliable journals. But over the last 10 years, the number of journals has become huge. There are like journals everywhere on the internet. And they are all publishing papers, and some of them are not very good journals. And so they've been called predatory publishers. Basically, these publishers will go around and they'll solicit articles. I get 4 or 5 emails a day asking me to contribute an article to such and such a journal. They'll take your money, so you can publish anything you want in them. They'll take your money. They quite often have a journal that's similar to that one of a real journal. So in my fields, the journal Cell is a very prestigious journal. There is a predatory publishers journal called Cells. So it's got a very similar name. If I could say I had a paper published in Cell, I'd be very happy with myself. But this journal is not the same level. It may not have an editorial board. It may not have any kind of review policy, or it may pay people to do the reviews. And it shouldn't be listed on PubMed or other indexing services. So you shouldn't find it in Web of Science or PubMed, but you will find it on Google Scholar, and that's where you need to be careful. So there are tools for evaluating journals, and there's this list called Beale's list that has instructions on how to recognize predatory journals, and it used to have a list of predatory journals. It's just something to be aware of, because it's really hard for people at your stage to be able to distinguish a good article from a good journal from a bad one. But you can, the common ones like Elsevier, those should generally be reliable, but even those, as we'll see in a bit, sometimes they publish stuff that's rubbish. So you do have to keep your eyes open and be aware that these things are existing at least. So corporate websites. So this is the 23andMe website that does your DNA sequencing. So it's going to have a lot of information about like what your genome means, and like telling you about how it can discover mutations. It probably has some information about how they do the genome sequencing at 23andMe, which they don't actually sequence the genomes, but they can find all the mutations and changes in your genome. So you can get information from this website, but you do need to bear in mind that it's not been peer reviewed, although probably they do have experts working for them. But its job is to sell you their product, right? So they're going to make sure that they've got positive reviews on their own website. They're not going to have negative reviews on their own website. So if you're going to look for reviews of something, then go look at a different website, not the one that the company owns. But they can contain very useful information about things like protocols, reagents, and things like that. So I definitely use corporate websites. I just make sure in the back of my mind that, well, maybe their product isn't as good as they say it is, and I should always compare it to the other company's product myself, not just taking their word for it. So the currency and relevance of these websites are usually pretty good, but the authority, accuracy, and purpose, again, most of the time the person writing the stuff that you find on a website is going to be somebody that's been more got an advertising sales training than a scientific training, although you would like to think they have some scientific training. But so their authority might not be all that great. And then the accuracy, they're going to show their best data for their product. And if they're doing a comparison to another product from another company, they're going to show the worst data for that company. And so you can't really believe their comparisons. And then the purpose, again, is to sell you something. So government websites, these are really used for rapid release of information. So the currency is going to be great. I mean, you should be able to find the most recent reliable information about COVID-19 is going to be on the CDC website. But they're not generally peer reviewed because they're trying to get this information out quickly, but they do have a lot of experts working at the CDC, and hopefully we can trust them to make sure that they're putting out accurate information. But it's important to note that the data can be provisional because they're putting it out rapidly. They may change their minds, and that tomorrow when you go back to that website, the data what you find there may not be the same. So these are good reliable resources, but the accuracy can be questionable under conditions where there's a pandemic going on, and even like smaller outbreaks like an Ebola outbreak will be published on the CDC website, but it may not be 100% reliable because it's had to come all the way here from Africa or wherever. This is the website that I publish my data to, so the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. I upload data like 3 times a week that goes onto this dashboard, and you can go and look at it. I do my best to make sure that it's good data, but sometimes our quality control doesn't always work, and so it still goes up there. But it's a service that we're providing, and we're trying to do it as quickly as possible, and it's a way for you to see in your city or town what the levels of COVID are looking like. And now it's actually becoming more very interesting, because as more and more people are getting vaccinated, less and less people are getting sick, but all the younger people are still getting it. So the levels of COVID are actually still quite high, but the number of people that are getting sick is low. And so I think it's a good thing, but it's important to remember that if you're not vaccinated, there's still COVID everywhere. Okay, academic and nonprofit websites. This is the Muscular Dystrophy Association. I've done some research in muscular dystrophy. This is the Energy Institute here at CSU. So these often have useful information in an accessible format. If you had a relative that was diagnosed with a muscular dystrophy, this would be a great website to go and find information. It's going to absolutely be directed right at you, totally relevant. And the people that work on these types of websites, they really care about people that have their disease. They probably either have the disease themselves or their relatives have the disease. They're making sure that information is accurate. And so the only questions about it are sometimes the way that it's written is more at a lay level. So like if you want high level scientific information, then I mean, I'm not going to go to that to learn about the primary research that's going on. But if you just want to learn about that disease, it's a great place to go. And then sometimes websites, particularly mine, is not that well maintained. Not everybody has time to go and maintain their website every day, so it might be out of date. The Muscular Dystrophy Association, I'm sure, is up to date, but I know my website at CSU, it's actually more up to date than usual at the moment because it got done this year, but I haven't finished doing it, so it's probably still not perfect. Forums, discussions, discussion boards, blogs, and Twitter. These are places where you can get information, and even scientific. There are scientists who are tweeting their results now, and sharing information to combat the coronavirus. They're doing that through Twitter. But quite often you can't tell who wrote the article. Sometimes these are moderated. So some of these protocol websites are moderated and people will take off stuff that's rubbish. But sometimes this one is sponsored by Biotechniques. So they've got an ulterior motive perhaps. But again, they do have useful information. And there's been multiple times where I've got something not right working with an experiment, and I go to one of these sites and somebody else has had the same problem and there's an answer written there. So I think it's an answer that you can then go try. You can look at it and see, well, yeah, that's a bad answer, or yeah, that's worth trying. But so use it at your own risk, basically. So that one, currency and relevance, might be great, but again, you can't really evaluate who's writing those answers. Is that somebody that has a PhD or somebody that's at your level or a high school student? That it's more of somebody's opinion than something that you can rely on. Okay, so I have an example, Nicolette. Do you want me to go through that, or do you just want me to skip to the end? It'll take me about another 5 or 6 minutes probably.
Yeah, feel free to go through your example.
Okay. All right, so So this is an example of basically an article. I'm just going to take you through like how I would evaluate it. It's kind of an obvious example, but hopefully it'll give you some food for thought, right? So back in 2003, which is probably like not long after most undergrads today were born, because my daughter is going to college this year, and she was born in 2003. That's when the SARS coronavirus 1 outbreak happened. And back then there was a lot of discussion about where it came from. And it's a bit scary that we didn't learn very much in between. But like, so one hypothesis was that it came from civet cats that were in markets in China, which apparently we didn't learn from that. And then there was another, this article suggesting the same thing, but in this Wired magazine, they had this article saying that SARS landed with stardust. So the idea that this virus came from outer space. And so probably even as an undergraduate, you can figure out that maybe that's not very likely, but I've read through this article, and the person that's making this statement is a professor at the Cardiff Centre for Astrobiology at Cardiff University in Wales, and his colleagues suggest in a letter to the, and with his colleagues, he suggests in a scientific letter to the journal The Lancet that the SARS virus may have arrived with 2,200 pounds of bacterial material that fall to the planet every day. And some of this material is highly evolved with an evolutionary history closely related to life that exists on Earth. So I'm like, well, this doesn't sound right. So I went and dug deeper into that. But before I do that, I just want to like point out that. So I looked up this guy again. I just looked up SARS coronavirus 2 and space, and the same guy. There's the same theory this time around. So there's an article in I forget what journal this was now. It's like a popular press article, a strange theory of coronavirus from space. So and this article is about the same person. Well, it's based on the same person. So anyway, the SARS landing with stardust. It's when you're thinking about the source type, it's a newspaper or magazine. So it's going to be bit sensationalized. Look at the person that wrote it. I Googled her. She's a freelance writer. She's a feminist, former science writer, reform shopaholic, Kaftan lover, and 40-something mum to a toddler and a teenager. Back in 2003, she wrote full-time for this magazine, but she's more of a hippie than anything else, I think. And then when you're looking at the source, it's cited, but not in full. So like, but I can find the name of the guy, so I could look up more about it. So the currency and relevance, it's about SARS. That was a relevant topic at the time. It's current. It's right around the time that this was all happening. But the authority, accuracy, and purpose, I need to look more into that in full. So I want to go back to the original article. So this is the article in the Lancet, and it starts. So the Lancet is a highly respected medical journal. It's ranked second in the general medicine category. So this is a good journal. This article's been published in. This guy, I Googled him. He's a professor at the time, he was a professor at a private university in the UK. He primarily publishes review articles, not primary research. And his most recent article, research article, was published in the Journal of Cosmology. And that's a journal that he's the executive editor of. So you can imagine that got great, really harsh peer review when he's the editor of the journal that he's publishing in. When it starts with a Sir, then that's an indication that it's correspondence, and it would have been in the correspondence section of the journal. And I mentioned earlier that correspondence is often not peer reviewed. So that's a bit of a red flag there. And then just reading through it, he makes this statement that we estimate that a ton of bacterial material falls to Earth from space daily, which translates into 10 to the power 19 bacteria, or 20,000 bacteria per square meter. So this is kind of a controversial thing to be saying, and there's no reference provided for it at all. So then I looked further through what he'd been putting out into the the literature to try and find where he's basing this whole idea on. But at this stage, where currency is okay, the relevance is okay. But again, I'm still like the authority and the accuracy and the purpose are still a bit questionable, especially like the fact that he's a private university in the UK is not a good thing. It is over here. Over here, like a private university is good, but in the UK, it's like if you can't get into the public universities, then you have somebody pay for you to go to a private one. So this is the article that he was basing all these statements on. He says microorganisms cultured from stratospheric air samples obtained at 41 kilometers. And what they've done was they took one of those big helium balloons and they put a sampler in it to collect air samples at 41,000 meters up in the stratosphere. And then they bring down that air and they put it through a filter to collect all the bacteria and then wash the collection device that contained the filter with buffer, phosphate buffered saline, and passed it through a filter. And then they basically collected the bacteria from that they get through that process. And then they grow them in media, and then they image them with a scanning electron microscope, and then they identify what bacteria are there by sequencing part of their RNA. So just looking at this journal, currency, this is like 2006 it was published, this article. So published online in 2006, but it was published in January 2003, the first version of it. The relevance, authority, and accuracy and purpose, I'm going to need to evaluate myself at this point. So I'm going to take, this is something that's easier for me to do than for you to do because I have more experience in this area. But this journal is a real journal. It's not a high level journal, but it is a real journal. But again, the guide's authority, accuracy, and purpose are somewhat questionable. So when you look at his results, what they found, this is a picture of the bacteria they found growing. Then this is the results from the sequencing data. So this is one bacteria that they found up in the stratosphere, and this is another one. And their conclusion is that the bacteria they found are at 99.9% or 100% similar to bacteria that are found on the Earth's surface. So they found bacteria way up high in the stratosphere, but they're very similar to bacteria that are present on the Earth's surface. And they conclude from this that the bacteria either came from Earth or from space, and they can't distinguish them. But there's nothing in this paper about viruses or SARS. So the relevance to the letter that he wrote to the Lancet is kind of very questionable. And the obvious conclusion is if the bacteria are like very, very similar to bacteria that we have here on Earth, then it's probably they managed to fly up into the stratosphere, then that they were up in the stratosphere and they're coming down here from there. And so from the conclusion that common terrestrial bacteria is present in the stratosphere, they end up with an article that says that SARS virus came from space. And this guy, when I looked him up a bit more closely, in 1974, he published a paper on a whole book on diseases from space. This guy, Fred Hoyle, is actually was knighted for his work in the UK. He was he's dead now, but like in 1974, they had this idea that all of these diseases are coming from space. And in 2020, he's got a whole book now called Cosmic Genetic Evolution. And he's on most of the chapters in this book about various viruses and diseases in space too. And somebody on this Retraction Watch website had got hold of the editor of this series of journals, because this is it's the academic press or something. So it's a good publisher. And they'd asked him about how this work is getting published. And what the editor says was, please note the author's views are not based on any experimental work or data that needed any external peer review or any other form of validation. In this context, I fail to understand how external review by someone else could have altered the decision to share this innovative idea with the genomic scientific community. Contents of the article were internally reviewed by all of us, including me as the serial editor. And so that in here, they are claiming that the current SARS pandemic is also from space. And they're publishing it in what appears to be a legitimate journal. And so like, I think all of you can probably tell that this is somewhat questionable, but it's not always that obvious. So this is an obvious example, but it's going to be much less obvious sometimes. And so I just want to make sure that you understand it's important to be critical of what you're reading on the internet. As Socrates probably didn't say, don't believe everything you read on the internet.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Wilusz. I learned a lot. I hope our students learned a lot. Before I close this out for the evening, I just wanted to open up to Shauna and Grace if you have any questions for either Dr. Wilusz or Rachelle and Jocelyn.
I just want to say thank you for all the information and just the reminders of the bias and other places to look for credible references, the crap test, that's cute. And it's something that you always remember, you know, like in grade school math where you learn those little sayings and, you know, they stick with you. So thank you for your time. And yeah, you know, you always think that you know all the things to look for, but each one of the lectures I learned a ton from. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
I want to thank you. I signed up late, but I have learned so much in the last, let's say, like an hour. So thank you very much for sharing the information and how to do the research. I think I've learned like we shouldn't trust everything on the internet, but like you went into details on how to go about it and what to look and all the sources. So thank you very much for sharing your knowledge with us.
Awesome. Thank you both for sharing. So I'm gonna close this out very quickly here. So that is the end of our second event for the STEM Research Series. The next and final event is the STEM Researcher Series Showcase, and that's happening on Wednesday, April 28th. So about a week from today from 2 to 4 p.m. This showcase will have two keynotes. One of them is Dr. Wilusz, who is here with us today. And there'll be an hour-long segment as well for faculty that will be presenting their research to you all. So I encourage you to attend if you have energy and if it's of interest to you. And I'll put the Zoom link and the RSVP in the chat real quick. And with that, thank you again to our presenters. I learned a lot. I'm happy that our students got a lot out of it who attended today. And I'm excited for those that watch this recording because it was a lot of great information. And thank you both to Shauna and Grace for joining us today. And with that, please have a good rest of your evening and have a good rest of your week.
Thank you.